So we have, hopefully that's working okay. We have obviously some die-hard people at this time of the day talking about the realms of metadata and governance at this time of the morning. I promise you I will not talk a word about that today. I will talk, and I'm happy to take questions on what we're doing at Zurich in terms of the holacratic self-service approach to data provision that will change the insurance business at the end. But what I'd like to take you through, having currently being now a Chief Data Officer, but formerly having been a Chief Digital Officer and a Chief Technology Officer, the intersection of these two areas in terms of changing the way businesses operate. So I guess you can class digital and data as the yin and yang of transformation. They are there to change the organisation. Digital is very much traditionally seen as the value creator, and data is seen as the back office centricity. And many of you may have heard of the 5 C's and the 5 V's. The 5 V's, 3 V's, 4 V's, 5 V's, whatever it may be of data. I've lost count. It'll probably be, if there were probably 9 words beginning with V, it'd be the 9 V's by now. But in reality, I work backwards. We all know of volume, velocity, and variety, which are the challenges. Insurance, it's not volumes as it has been in the past for me, maybe at the Royal Mail or in the telco world or in the retail world. It's variety and veracity. It's lots and lots of very small data sets and working out where the value is. And that's where the realm of data science is emerging at the back end as well as at the front end. Data science is not a front end discipline. Data science is a way to get the right information to the operational coalface as quickly as possible. So volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value. The 5 C's of digital marketing are customer conversations, coordinates, content, and cookies. I would say customer, 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 and customer when it comes to digital. That's probably a better rendition. So although digital is seen as the business value creator and data is seen as the back office, the reality is the roles operate on both sides of the coin. Digital may be the customer's champion driving the customer experience and a change agent, but without the agility of the Chief Data Officer, it is impossible to deliver a digital experience, a frictionless experience across your organisation. So we've heard of the mythical single view. It doesn't exist. Don't let them sell it to you. There's no such thing as a single view of the data. Data is a changing relationship. It's a perspective. All we can hope to do is keep track at n-1 in terms of what's actually happening and then inject that into the coalface that we know of as digital. So I would say that if we look at data and digital through a lens, the biggest challenge I've seen in both roles is that it's legacy thinking, not legacy systems, that causes all the problems in our organisation today. It's right data, not big data. Right data requires right focus. These sort of bottom-up approaches to harnessing all the information in the world, every blade in a jet engine that generates more data than Twitter, in a single jet engine blade, more data than a global feed of Twitter. Well, that's fantastic, and it's very impressive that we can harness all that information, but it is meaningless unless we have context. So outcome and value creation is key, and the digital and data role, whether they're combined or whether they're individuals working together, are tantamount to success in this industry. So I would argue that right data and right focus equals right decisions. And these two roles operating in partnership change operating models. Certainly it's changing at Zurich, and as Andrew had mentioned, it's changing very large organisations very quickly. And the biggest challenge is the culture that we fight, because we can move now. We're no longer complaining about the data or being able to harness it. We're complaining about the fact that we can't move quickly enough because the business can't move with us. So a quick culture is also required. And in a large organisation, quick culture is very difficult. So I would say, let's just quickly, briefly look at my interpretation of what digital and data is. I've seen so many variations, but in my words, I suppose, it's a combination of people's perspectives, so I don't take credit for this. It's a medium for any consumer interaction. Actually, I'll take the word consumer out. I'll talk about that in a minute. It's a medium for any interaction. Taken over the internet for the purposes of mutual value creation. I'd also take the word internet out. This is a traditional word. It is not the realm of marketing anymore. There is more work in our organisation from a digital perspective going on from the inside out. It's the employee experience where most of the decisions that impact your business and your customer experience are actually made. It is more an operational role today than people think. And that's typically the realm of the Chief Data Officer. And it's not just inside out, understanding the world from the data that you have internally in your systems. It's what's happening, obviously, in the traditional marketing world, the channels, the omni-channel world, in terms of what's coming in. But digital is moving from the front office to the back office. It's now becoming as much a focus on employee-to-employee interaction as it is on customer to business, business to customer, consumer to consumer. So it's changing. Data, as we know, is not actually simply back office efficiency. So this is my, why is it data always needs about 800 words to describe it? We're all sort of trying to build business glossaries and make things simple, and yet that is the simplest way I could represent what the world of data is. I mean, you can't use the word stuff, can we? It doesn't really sound good with the role. So it's an approach to intelligent decision-making through the contextual, it's a very important word, unification of people, systems, machines, and sensors, sensory interaction, across any medium. The difference between data and digital is digital. Data is physical and digital, and therefore you still have to fight those challenges of warehouses full of paper and various other aspects. And those of you that have tried to physicalize or digitize a physical process will know that it doesn't work. You cannot just stick a physical process today on an iPad. It doesn't work. It looks good, it doesn't work. So data is moving, actually ironically, nearer the front office. So data and digital are moving in different directions, and there is a massive grey area in terms of where they interact. Data, as we all know, is increasingly unstructured, and increasingly we need to know more about what's happening in the outside world, in the reams of unstructured data, than we knew in terms of what's inside our own organisations. An insurer has to change. There's no black box for the actuaries anymore to work out what's happening in the outside world, sort of chanting and using black magic and rain dances and lots of calculations. That's fantastic. The reality is there's sensors in cities, there's sensors in cars. Cars are changing, cities are changing, people are changing, devices are changing. This information is a way to quantify risk if we harness it correctly. Google have been doing this for a number of years. They haven't entered the insurance business yet, but they will, and we'll have an Uber for an insurance business, because the insurance business is just like the impact of Uber and Airbnb. It's a broker-based business. So we have to start to use those external sensory inputs and information in order to change the way we operate. So it's moving near the front office interactions, and actually now it's less about reports and dashboards and governance and metrics. It's still important. The traditional skills are still important, but it's more about analytics at critical inflection points at the coalface of your organisation. It's one thing looking back and seeing how well you underwrote business or how well you did in terms of profit. It's another thing intercepting bad decisions before they happen. So heads, your digital, tails, your data. Is it really that simple? Well, it isn't. Heads means front office. That doesn't mean digital anymore. That means digital and data in comparison, in combination. And tails, obviously, traditionally is the back office, the world of data, but digital is moving that way. So both roles operate in part on both sides of the coin. So I would contest, if we look at the wonderful Apple Watch and Tag Heuer's abysmal example yesterday of what a smartwatch might look like. I prefer my old Tag, I have to say. It's a tale, and if you excuse the Dickens terminology, and there'll be a few poor jokes, I apologise, a tale of two CDs, Chief Digital and Chief Data. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It's the best of times because digital and data is pervasive now and increasingly configurable. We don't have to code as much anymore to make these changes. It's the worst of times because it's a nascent sort of standard that's coming out. We have the concept of the API economy and the Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things today, unfortunately, is more like the dystopia of Judge Dredd than the utopia of the Jetsons. It's a bit of a mess, and it hasn't really got its act into gear in terms of being able to leverage it. Obviously, wisdom, we can capture all these events. We can capture information from the outside world. Technology is at that tipping point now. And we can use operational analytics to do something with it. But it's also foolish because we have the world of papergeddon, trying to digitise physical processes, when actually we need to change the way the businesses are actually operating. So I would say, let's look quickly at the Chief Digital Officer. Why a Chief Digital Officer? And I'll find out how many of you here are going to be Chief Digital Officers. Data officers already are, by whether you think this is funny or not. If all of you become Chief Digital Officers, I think that would be all the CDOs in the UK, because I think there's only about 100 or so. So we'd all be working together. So it's my chance to talk you out of it or talk you into it. So, first joke of the day, I've got two of them. Basically, the Chief Digital Officer or the Chief Data Officer is effectively a different breed than the Chief Digital Officer. If you ask a Chief Data Officer what omnichannel CX is, he'll tell you that it's crossing between England and France numerous times in a vintage Citroën. He has no idea what omnichannel customer experience actually is. You have to be quite old to remember the CX, the Citroen CX. It's that horrendous thing there, I apologise. But the digital officer, although he doesn't understand, is a different mindset, is, according to Forbes, the CEO of the next century. These companies will be headed by digital individuals. That's the theory. And their role is to take the chief information officer from CIO to IOC, intelligent orientation around the customer. The CIO is obsessed with integration. But the chief digital officer focuses on the power of me being you and I, focuses on the empowered consumer, the millennial generation, and the way they think and the way that they capture and share information. My daughters share information on Facebook. They're intravenously linked to it that I wouldn't have shared or confided with my closest friends when I was a teenager, and they do it. They're willing to share if there's value in the process. So the whole concept of privacy and of compliance and of regulation is changing in terms of what is acceptable in the modern market, in terms of our consumers. So the Chief Digital Officer realises that we'll go back there. That's just ruined the animation, isn't it? It's not just a single interaction that matters. The zero moment of truth in digital in terms of making the right decision when you're talking to that customer or partner happens everywhere. It's everything interconnected. It's what's happening between business and consumer links, business and business, consumer to consumer, employee to employee, human to human, machine to machine, human to machine. All of these interaction points need to be harnessed in the digital world for a positive customer experience. So, Chief Digital Officer, for those Trekkies out there, is Lieutenant Uhura. Sits on the bridge of the organisation. Deals with alien life forms, customers, and their interaction. I don't know how many of you have seen mission statements of many companies. Often customer isn't even mentioned. It's we'll do things fast, we'll do things better, we'll be the best in our business. Nobody mentions the customer. The digital officer is there, or the chief customer officer, if that's the title you've seen, is there to protect the customer. And they're more a good mediator and a listener. You also have to look good in Lycra, so I didn't do very well in that capacity. When we look at the Chief Digital Officer in terms of what they are, they're a multilinguist. They talk technology and business, but most importantly, they talk the language of various areas of the business. And at Zurich, the Digital and Data Officer, although we both come from a very technical background, sit in the business. They talk technology and they mediate and align in compatibility mode. They keep it very straightforward, they keep it very simple, because this is complex stuff, even for those of us that have been in the industry for 25 years. There's been more change. I started when there were 4 database technologies. I've lost count now. I think we're about 505 or something like that. There seems to be a new database technology every week. It's a very, very fast-moving environment. They are utterly ruthless and being interaction-driven. All they're focused on is how do we make this interaction better? How do we ensure we make the right decision? And for those of you that remember the famous Donald Rumsfeld speech, they focus on the known knowns, the known customer issues, and how we make it better. They're not into the worlds of exploration or trying to find things that that nobody really knows about at this moment in time. So I think I'll give you an idea of the world of the digital officer, I think.
Emma. 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 Emma.
Sometimes you need digital friction rather than frictionless digital, I think, in those circumstances. So why the Chief Data Officer? Well, the Chief Data Officer is cited as the Chief Operating Officer of the current and next decade as well. And the issue you have is when you ask what a digital officer, what Cognos 10 is, they think it's a turn of the decade music concert in Africa, in an African Democratic Republic, actually. There are some people laughing there. Well done, that's impressive. It's a bad joke, I know. But they are, instead of fighting for the customer, they're moving the exec suite from OCD, obsessive integration syndrome or compulsive disorder as we know it, to CDO, which is the focus of the data on the customer. And where the digital officer focuses on the power of me, the data officer focuses on the power of we. It's important to protect the assets of the organisation. It's important to ensure that every time you create insight, it's valuable to multiple areas of the organisation. So the data officer, in essence, realises that it's not just a single view that matters. Obviously, increasingly with IoT, with the world of home thermostats. Anybody ever read the Nest contract? It basically, in about 30 pages, says, I own you and everything you do in the house. And if you stick cameras in, I'm going to know what you're doing in the house as well. This is the world that we're entering. Products that basically gather information. The actual control of the house temperature, which actually, frankly, in some of these devices doesn't work that well, is really secondary in terms of what they're trying to do. So the single view is required everywhere. But the reality is, in the same way, it's still everything interconnected because it's about relationships and it's changing. It's operational analytics now, not back office reporting. And it's all about being agility driven for positive customer experience. The chief data officer is an agility chameleon. I can't think of a better description for it. So let's look at the data officer. Yes, it's Mr. Spot. I'll spare you the Star Trek music for a second time. It was bad enough the first time. But they boldly go wherever. It's logic and science in usable form. And whilst you don't require pointy ears, you do need to hear everything, and you need to be the corporate consciousness of what is happening across the organisation. Now, I'll go as far to saying, have we got any data scientists in the room? One. Okay, that's a good skew in terms of statistics there. That's quite good. We've got one. I actually think that the world of data science will, in terms of what we do with it today, increasingly become a commodity. It will be how we configure it. I think the algorithmic side of it will still be there, but the amount of code that we need to write going forward will lessen dramatically. If you look at some of the frameworks coming out, RapidMiner and Alteryx come to mind. So in many ways, the role is changing. It's the science officer, if you like, or the analytics officer that talks business. It's the logical voice of reason through chaos, and the digital role can create chaos, as can other areas of the business. And this individual greases the agility wheels of the organisation. If you're not able to provide information at the right point quickly, you're not able to operate or compete in a digitally orientated market. In the Donald Rumsfeld analogy, this is the person that deals with the unknown unknowns. They're going to try and find out what we don't know already. They may well be delivering and supporting the digital officer in terms of delivering value, but they are looking for what we don't know from information that we don't use. Because the grim reality is most organisations use a fraction of the data they actually have at their disposal and go looking for data they really don't need. So the world of the chief data officer and millennials, which is the challenge.
I'm from the millennium generation. I was forced in the digital age. I will use my knowledge of MySpace and YouTube and email to rule this planet!
Wow, you're right. He doesn't have much upper body strength.
Use the CRS database to size the model.
That data is wrong.
Then use the SIBS database.
That data is also wrong.
Can you average them?
Sure, I can multiply them too.
So the reality is, please, this concept that the chief data officer is going to disappear. Well, the title may, but the role will not disappear. Do we lose a chief executive officer just because we think everyone can crowdsource strategy? We can crowdsource digital, we can crowdsource data, but you still need a community or a collection of individuals that are focused on what this needs to be. And many people are telling us now that the chief data officer is like the turn of the century chief electricity officer, the electrification post, that after 15 years of harnessing electricity became redundant because everyone knew how electricity worked and they could harness it. Well, that's fine, but data is not electricity. So I don't think data-driven will be the new normal in terms of organisations, unless you're a startup, and even then it becomes a burden as you scale, as you grow. So for me, data is a journey, not a destination, and the role or the concept of what we call the role today will always exist. It may morph into a chief operating officer. It may, in some cases, morph into chief executive officers of the future. But IoT and the emergence of sensors will widen the role, not narrow it. And I predict a riot, if you sort of apologise with the pun there, or the acronym, because the cybersphere of the near future will resemble an electrical power network of information flows. If you look at the worlds of streaming, you look at what's happening now in terms of different, the problem now is rapidly becoming veracity and variety, harnessing different formats. It's no longer being able to process. Data acquisition and marshalling is now a commodity. You don't need a fleet of programmers to do it anymore. I used to be an OLAP architect. I think that particular title disappeared about 8 years ago. It's no longer needed. Chief data officers will become the step-down transformers for this process, or their variants in the future. And they'll turn high voltage information into lower voltage forms, because somebody needs to get the context out of all this mountain of data, because most of it is meaningless to what we're actually doing and where we're going. So the chief data officer is the modern agility plumber, agility chameleon, as I've suggested. The problem is today, in most tier 1 organisations, I don't class startups in this, we spend 90% of our time looking at the data inside, the structured data. Still, even today, with all the things that are happening, we still rely on internal databases, and we operate in silos. Hands up who's got marketing, finance, sales, distribution, all integrated perfectly. Put your hand down, Andrew. That's where it's answering too quickly. Yeah, but the fact is, we never quite catch up because we're focused on the world of structured data. Structured data takes time. It's a 9-month cycle. If you're particularly radical, maybe like the Royal Mail or Boeing or one of the areas, you might get it down to 2 or 3 months. We need to change the way we operate. Frictionless digital needs the other 3 tiers of data. It needs to go outside the organisation. It needs to work with unstructured data. Yes, we'll always need SQL. Yes, we'll always need to create models, but the future is not modelling data. The future is harnessing it, is picking out the nuggets and processing it without any human interaction whatsoever. And whilst that may be frightening, it's also an amazing opportunity. The future for data doesn't belong to the SQL programmers, the ETL developers. It belongs to ontology specialists, semantics, natural language processing, cognitive processing. Look at Watson coming out and various other persons. And what I call pulse analytics. So instead of structuring all this information, we pick the nuggets out using data science and unstructured algorithms, and we interpret it and use it with no handoffs, no partners, no IT people in the process. Rules-based, it's the old sort of rules-based process that we're moving to. And that requires people that understand the business end-to-end and can configure this type of intelligence quickly. Less coders. Still going to need to build those algorithms. We still need algorithms for propensity. We need to understand what's happening in the market. But now that becomes a core focused skill. And the data scientist now needs to use more tools than ever before to achieve what they need to achieve. So I think the Chief Data Officer is all about mind the gap. For those of you that have travelled on the underground today, you'll be aware of that. This concept of systems and information, the age-old concept, and data rules and events is widening at an exponential rate. And IoT will make it even bigger. We can't handle the information within our own organisations today. What are you going to do when most of your organisation's information is outside your firewall perimeter and in the Internet of Things? Well, the question is, we're going to panic unless we deal with it. You can't govern information that's in the hands of the consumer. You have to go with the flow. And that means we may have to put things out in the future, put data out, even in regulated environments, that is not totally fit for purpose. We may have to accept a level of imperfection, and we may have to be able to identify a level of imperfection, but still move with that information. So data rules and events have increasing complexity. Governance and regulation will always be at least one step behind. And that's an opportunity, but it's also a risk for us. And the data quality gap is going to exponentially widen. Big data quality is probably the term we should be using. So digital and data, are they small change, or are they an opportunity to really coin it in terms of money? Well, as I've said, digital is moving from marketing and channel customer experience to back to front interactions. It's moving back through the customer experience back to the process issues that you have. I don't know how many people put their hands up that their processes match what the customers need. Mine certainly don't. This is going to take time. In fact, most data organisations still reflect the organisation structure. So I remember my first few days at Zurich saying, well, actually what we need is a unit that focuses on the customer. That was a radical idea, I think, and it really shouldn't be for an insurance company, for a retail company, although it is incredibly difficult to achieve for all of us. So we are moving from back to front, or from front to back, and digital is moving from consumer interaction to every interaction, be it machines, be it people, be it the outside world. And you know, it's becoming more difficult to know whether you're talking to a machine or a human. This presents all sorts of problems, especially in regulated areas. And data is moving from being a byproduct of the event to the catalyst for the interaction. That's a big difference. It's not capturing what happened anymore, it's changing what's about to happen. And I think that's where it starts to become very interesting. So certainly from byproduct to catalyst is another major move. So I think operating model transformation is a key part of it. The perception of what a data officer is, whatever the title may be, there are a lot of people doing this role that don't have the title. You could be a chief analytics officer, you could be a head of data, you could be in a community in terms of across more of a sort of working across areas. These are all chief data officers. It's the role that matters, not the title. And the concept of us being a cost centre, of an expensive janitor, and of a fall guy when things go wrong. You know, our data's not working. It's his fault. It's her fault. It doesn't work like that. We know that. It's a culture. But it's moving from this concept of the data culture culprit to the decision accelerator. I would actually call it decision science now, because that's really what this is all about, making the right decisions and creating value from those decisions. The Chief Digital Officer, of course, is moving from the world of paper eradicator and iPad provider, because that's how it started, isn't it? Let's give the exec suite iPads, and we're digital. The reality is, as you know, there's more to it than that, and it doesn't need to be a mobile device to deploy digital capability. But certainly moving from the world of kind of make our processes digital to an all-party champion. This is the individual that champions our customers, our partners, and to a certain extent, our employees and colleagues as well. And they become the interaction catalyst for what we're doing and for the progression of that. So what I conclude, I think, is that digital data are a pick and mix store. And they go together. For those of you who remember Woolies, used to go and get your pick and mix. Digital is the pick part of the pick and mix. It configures and adapts offerings to each personalised palette at pace. So as the business changes, as the needs of the business change, it is in touch with that. It knows what flavours you like. And it ensures that you get those flavours at the time that you need them. Data is the mix aspect. It dynamically builds the common and popular flavour combinations before we know that those are the combinations that we like. Those of you who've seen Watson, the cognitive cooking assistant, where it comes up with sort of chemical, it's quite interesting. Some of the recipes the cognitive technology comes up with are fantastic, and some of them are just evil because it's based on chemistry rather than people's preference. You can't take the person and our emotion and the human knowledge out of this equation. This isn't about automating everything that a human does, it's about supplementing everything that a human does. And that's why I think pick and mix is a good analogy. And if you take that into achieving the zero moment of truth, which is the aspiration for digital, which is making that decision that matters, that upsells, that cross-sells, that makes your customer in a bad situation feel good, that provides value beyond what you actually sell or do, I think that delivering CX, customer experience, you need AX, BX, and DX. So if we look at the realm of digital and data now, no longer is digital at the front end. Digital and data are in collaboration at the front end of the organisation, at the back end. Data is driving the agility of how we interact with people. It is the agility intelligence with your customers through your channels and through various other means. Of course, that's the mix at the front end. The pick at the front end is the personal interactions. So that's the customer experience, what the customer needs, and keeping on top of it. And as we go down through the data agility layer and the interaction context layer, we move into the BX and the DX components, which are the foundation for making this happen. We need less barriers. The number of handoffs you had in moving data through an organisation, by the time you've actually delivered something, people have lost the will to live and the business has moved on. That needs to change. Those barriers, the command and control hierarchies need to change. And of course, data itself, the right data experience, we need frictionless APIs. We need data that it can change with our processes, and that is a full-time job. It really is, in terms of the role of the data officer. So both mindsets are critical going forward. They may morph into individual roles. Who cares? I think the reality is you need both working in tandem, and I think that's the future in terms of how these work. So for me, digital moves to the back office, data moves to the front office. Hello, Chief Digital Officer, goodbye, Chief Data Officer, please, come on. There's no way this is going to be the world. The digital officer cannot do what the data officer does unless it's a combined role, and even then, your direct reports need to be digitally and data orientated. They are different, if not complementary and overlapping disciplines. It's focus from the Chief Digital Officer and it's empowerment from the Chief Data Officer that enables your organisation to deliver transformational change. So, just to wind up, digital and data are different. Transformation engineers, digital is all about the customer, data is all about the company, and that's what they're focusing on. They're both so when we look at outcome acceleration, digital is looking at being right first time, delivering that experience very quickly in a fluid environment. Data is being about right every time. When you do it for everyone. That means I'm running out of time. Apologies. When it comes to complexity eradicators, digital is looking at the front end. Traditionally, data is looking at the back end. And when it comes to value creation, digital is looking at all parties in the relationship, and data is looking at all systems in the relationship. But I also contest that they are the same. They're both transformation engineers at pace. They have the same outcome in mind. They are both outcome accelerators. They're looking for a positive customer experience. They are both complexity eradicators. They are looking to reduce costs in your underlying processes. And they are both value creators. If it's not monetary, if you can't monetize what you're trying to do with digital and data, it isn't worth doing. They are revenue generators. So, to be successful in the digital and data domain, although they are different and in some ways the same and overlap, interaction intelligence needs partnership. It's the partnership of the digital officer and the data officer in tandem. And I think the roles are more powerful together in terms of what's happening in the global world with IoT emerging and various other sides of things in terms of the about quantities and the types of information that we have to harness going forward. Peter Hinson says we're entering the age of uncertainty. The network always wins. Communities and collaboration is more powerful than hierarchies and command and control structures. Digital is the interaction catalyst in the world that we're actually going through now. And data is the agility plumber. Data and digital will drive the new normal in terms of what we're doing with business models going forward over the next decade. And I would say that we've mentioned that it's everything interconnected, but actually they're the same coin and different sides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon. Really engaging presentation, really fascinating. So, any questions for Simon? I have got one. In terms of the two different CDOs, or whatever they might be called, do you see them sitting at the same table as the CIO, CFO, COO? That's that sort of level that they need to be at. That they're directly, got the ear of the CEO, or does it not matter? Or
depends on the individual and the types of people you have at the board level. I think at Zurich, the CIO role no longer exists.
All right.
So it's digital and data, and then the CIO functions are split into the various functions of architecture, application development. That's a recent change. So depending on the organisation, I think the more customer focused you are, you could argue that they could coexist with the chief information officer, chief technology officers, whatever the terminology is. I would say that actually what will happen is that the briefs will become the modern CIO and CMO brief going forward, whatever the titles will be. And in fact, if you're struggling to meet customer demand, you're struggling to adapt, actually the CIO role at the moment traditionally is very damaging because it's totally focused on obsessive integration syndrome. You can only treat that with digital and data thinking.
Yeah.
So it will vary on the culture of the organisation and what you're trying to do. I've seen CIOs that are very data-centric, but the reality is that they traditionally are still very infrastructure, very dev-build-centric. And of course, to build applications quickly, we talk about rapid application development, you need to do things a different way than you did traditionally, and that's where these mindsets come in. So it depends on the organisation. I think the roles will morph eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any further questions?
If a company doesn't have either of those roles at the moment, which one would you suggest it goes for first?
Depends on the company. I would say if you're struggling to stay in touch with the customer, the first role would probably be the digital officer to get that driving, because of course you can achieve quite a lot if you've got focus and you've got funding. if you are already reasonably customer-centric, but what you can't do is you can never quite get there quickly enough to deliver. You know what you need to do, you just can't do it quickly enough. I think the data officer role is perhaps quicker. There are hybrid individuals out there that can do a combination, so if it's not too large an organisation with too many sort of lines of business and structures, one person can do it at the outset and start. It's a tough job because there's no job description. I wrote my job description at Zurich, and I haven't done anything that's on that job description in the first 9 months. So it's a difficult thing to quantify, but I think it will depend on what the challenge is in your organisation at the moment. Digital doesn't exist typically, whereas some aspects of the data mindset do exist within the traditional IT approach. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, one more question there.
So just a quick, which role are you doing just now?
Do you know, that's a good question, because I'm building apps as well. I'm officially a chief data officer, but I think and I have a counterpart, former Bupa chap called Stephen Zurnell, it's a great guy, who's the digital officer, and we both arrived at pretty much the same time. Are we both doing specific things in our own domains? Yes. Are we both doing things in each other's domains as well together? Yes, we are. So I think you can't deliver a digital experience without data, and you can't push data out to the operational environment or the customer environment without digital thinking. So in many ways, the factory, if you like, that we're building, the rapid, what I call a holacratic sort of operating model, which is the way startups work, we're building inside a very traditional institution, 150 years old, very much structured the way we work. We're overlapping, but we're overlapping in collaboration rather than sort of stepping on each other's toes.
When you took the role on, did you pull in all the other parts of the organisation that had some kind of data remit to centralise it?
Well, the first thing I did when I came in is I shut down the reporting team completely, because we move files and reports around the organisation. Nobody knows who's using it. So, yes, I spent the first 7 or 8 weeks creating a business plan and a technology plan. I call it the 46 ways and the 12 steps. The 12 steps are the foundations. The 46 ways are what we are actually trying to do between now and 2020 in terms of the customer. So you can argue that's a little bit digital in terms of the roadmap. That was the first role to get that, because there was no funding for data, no funding for digital. It was about building large core projects, which most organisations do. It was then alignment of the projects, and of course then it was alignment of the stakeholders and explaining. So I remember my first conversation, it was with the exec team, was like, hello, nice to meet you. What are you and what are you going to do? It was quite interesting. I don't think anyone's asking that now, because I'm part of the business. The fact that we come from a technology background is academic. So it was very much about alignment, it was indirect, and driving to a model where I can fund and drive my own destiny next year. That's the challenge of the role. It's very much a sales role at the outset.
Excellent.
Okay.
Many thanks, Simon.
No worries. Thanks very much.